My name is Alain Fabry. I'm patron at Asia State France and the Senior Director for Public and Governmental Affairs at Biometric. As you know, this series, China Conversations, aims at bringing experts to our audience in order to share their point of view and their wisdom on China public policies and on geopolitics as well. So we met earlier this month to listen to David Bagrez. That was a discussion about the second China talk, and that was the only conference we had on China Conversations in January. Today, we will be focusing on China's relationship with multilateralism and regional organizations, and we'll be focusing on the BRICS in particular. This is a grouping of GDP powerhouses, which is both admired and feared by Western governments, as well as by investors and industrial players. So we'll delve into the shifting dynamics of global power, the evolving role of China, and how the BRICS nations are shaping a new world order. This forum is an opportunity to examine whether we are heading towards a truly multipolar world or a polarized one, and to discuss the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. So we are honored today to have with us two distinguished experts who will help us navigate these complex issues. Jean-Philippe Bragança is portfolio manager at Absolute Investimentos, an hedge fund based in Sao Paulo, and a China expert that we are so lucky to have with us tonight, because we're not living in Paris. Jean-Philippe has lived extensively in China and in Singapore, and is an associate at CEBRI, the Brazilian Center for International Relations, which is a little bit like the Asia Society of Brazil. With very strong ties to Europe, due to family history, he also speaks fluently German and French, Chinese very well too, I know that, and he studied at INSEAD, which is what's something that French people like. Very proud of, yes. Online, we have Dr. Daniel Chier, a distinguished portfolio strategist and economist, who serves as non-resident fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, CCG. We have met a few people from CCG in the past. Your career spans in prominent institutions across Asia and Europe, including SPX Capital in London, the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo, Goldman Sachs in Beijing, and the Industrial Bank of Korea Securities in Seoul. Dr. Chier brings a wealth of expertise in the field of geopolitics. Has contributed to leading think tanks in the US, in India, and Indonesia, and the Philippines, and his insights are widely published across the Asia-Pacific region. You've got a PhD graduate of Waseda University in Japan, and you've pursued studies in economics and finance in China, in Japan, in Korea, and in the UK, where you currently live. And we are very happy to have you here tonight. Thank you very much, Daniel. Daniel would have liked to come here, but he couldn't get a visa. From London to France, it's becoming complicated. So thank you for being here online. I have many questions to you guys. Before I ask my first question, don't forget, and I know that Wednesday will ask me to say it, and Raya as well, so I'm being controlled. Don't forget to become a member of Asia Society France if you like what you see. And if you like what you hear. My first will be for Jean-Philippe. So, Jean-Philippe, how could you define the BRICS? You know, you have a Brazilian perspective, which I think we are very interested to hear. Brazil just hosted the G20 summit, so please let us know. What's in it for Brazil?
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, honor to be at Asia Society. I think the issue of BRICS is especially important for France and Europe, and especially France, is a great place to have this discussion, because I think that it's a world of multipolarity, and if there's one place that can make a difference regarding BRICS, it could be Europe, and outside of the US and China, of course. And within Europe, I can only see France having a big vision for the continent. So the BRICS is, everyone says BRICS is just an acronym. So I think you have to see from the opposite side. So despite BRICS being just an acronym, despite the BRICS being founded by countries that have nothing to do with each other, despite all of that, after 15 years, it still exists. it's still something that exists and it's getting momentum, right? So back in 2009, when it started, it was just BRIC, which was Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Then they added South Africa, which made sense. And then 15 years later, they had the first expansion, which was 2024, that they added basically a couple of Middle Eastern countries and a couple of countries that are not well seen in the world, let's say, right? So, you know, we had Iran, which was the most polemic one, right? But then last year, we had a new round of countries either joining or wanting to join, which will include, you know, Turkey wants to join, Indonesia, Malaysia. So it's becoming more and more interesting. And then you ask why, right? So if BRICS is, you know, after the Russian invasion, why do people want to join the BRICS? So I think actually the Russian invasion of Ukraine is actually one of the reasons, because after the invasion came the sanctions, right? So with the sanctions, I think everyone looked at the world and said, look, I better have a second choice. I better have a plan B, right? So BRICS comes a lot from that. I think also that the BRICS, despite having a lot of differences, what all these countries have in common is that they are outsiders somehow. They don't participate in the global current framework. They don't want to change the framework. They're not anti-West, but they are not included, right? So it makes sense for them to be part of a group that includes them, right? So it's not a coincidence that the founders of BRICS, you had Russia and China, which are part of the UN Council, and Brazil and India that have always wanted to be part of the UN Council, but have never been able to. So this will be the BRICS, and for Brazil, the expansion of BRICS was not ideal for us because we were more powerful when it was a close group. So it shows the power that China has in the BRICS when the expansion was done. But looking back now, it's also an opportunity. So the addition of the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi and UAE, that's been quite important. And for Brazil, you know, it's a forum. It's basically a forum that you can discuss, that you can have big discussions without the US. And I think a good example is what happened in Kazan, that you have this India and China having the conversation about the borders, and it was in Kazan, right? So I don't know if I spoke too much. I don't know how much time we have, but this is basically BRICS.
Thank you very much. We will leave time for open discussion and Q&A, because I'm sure that will be many of them. We've been talking about BRICS, and we'll come back to it later. But I wanted to ask Daniel. We also talk about the global South. That's a term that has been circulating around. Is China part of the global South, according to you?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciate for the invitation. I really wish I could go to Paris, actually. We got some like a Paris science here, the spirits Paris. Right? So anyway, so global South, indeed, like at least in China, we think China is a part of the global South. There's some historical background of that. China was a communist country, was considered third world country. And then if you remember, in early 1950s or mid 1950s, a group of countries after post the Second World War, mostly developing countries from Latin America, Africa, some Asian countries, decided to meet in Indonesia. So they form a sort of a developing non-alliance group, right? That's where China considers itself as a part of the global South. From that perspective. Of course, you could argue what is global South, and global South from the Chinese perspective is a developing country that they don't share the same visions, or its economic status not as strong as the Western countries in Western Europe or Japan or North America. Right? You probably remember, for people in the room, like in China, Wen Jiabao, the former Prime Minister in China, I like to say China is a huge country. Its economy is very big. It was like number two. It's still number two. But if you divide it by 1.4 billion people, China is quite poor country. and China has a lot of resources. It has a lot of advantages in certain areas. But if you divide it by 1.4 billion, it's still developing. A lot of the things are scarce. So from this economic developing sort of a status, China GDP per capita is a mid-income. Right, it's still considers itself not developed country, and then it is a part of a global south. Naturally, people will say, okay, yes, but then you're saying you're number 2 economy, you're a superpower, and then it's true that China used. I mean, this is a private conversation. This is a personal view. Doesn't representing any affiliations I'm affiliated with. But basically, if you think about. That's the case. It's true that whenever China wants to be a leader, you like to say it's a superpower. It deserves the respect. But whenever it wants to, at least a previous decade or so, when China negotiate trade deals, it like to say it's a still developing country. It likes to get the special treatment or clauses to trade as a developing country. I think it's fair to say China considers itself as a superpower, as a major power, but it's a leader in the global south, mainly from an economic development perspective, mainly because it doesn't share all the views. It has a lot of economic challenges like many developing countries have, and it has a different worldviews. So it's true, I mean, in my view, it is part of global south, but it's a special one in global south. It's a lead, I mean, it's way bigger than many other economies as a leader in the global south. So yeah, that's my view.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So we talked about BRICS, we talked about Global South, the involvement of China in these different organizations. There are many others, the G20, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there's the One Belt, One Road. Is there a clear intention from China to reshape the world order?
Yeah, so getting a little bit of the previous question is, the way I see it is, you have the G7 with the US. Mm-hmm. The G7 doesn't contain all the Western countries. It doesn't contain Australia, South Korea, right?
Right. It's recent.
And China with the BRICS. So, China is the leader of the Global South. It doesn't speak for the whole of the Global South, just the way that US is the leader of the G7, but it doesn't speak for all of them. So I kind of see these two groups together. So the question, if they want to reshape the global order, right? With all this... So I think that's what China wants, but that's not necessarily what all the countries want, right? So I think that if you ask all of these countries if they want to change the global order and have now it's a bit different the past 2 weeks, right? But speaking on a long term, it's not clear that all these countries in the BRICS in the global south, they want to have a weak US or a totally weak. They want if they could choose a better US to a new global order, I'm pretty sure they would prefer a better US, right? Maybe a lot of these countries
we will do.
Let's see. So I think that they don't want a new order, and the two best examples I think it's Brazil, it's a good example, India, and the Middle East. India, I think, is the counter example that proves a lot of this accusation about the BRICS. India is a Quad member. Mm-hmm. India is has been an ally to the US in the past years. In the Middle East, the same. Saudis. You have the UAE. You have Turkey that wants to join the BRICS. Is still at least talking about it's a NATO member. You have Thailand, which is a treaty ally to the US. So it's more as an alternative, right? That's how everyone sees. That's not China has all this GSI, all these new frameworks. Yes. But I think at the end it's just a forum. For most countries, it's a forum. Exactly, right? So ideally, the G20 would have been that. I think it was India's foreign minister, Jay Shankar, who said that they asked him and said, what about the BRICS? And he said, well, the G20 happened, but they still kept the G7. So you keep the G7, we keep the BRICS, right? So that's So I think
there's no substitution.
yeah, like if you're having conversations outside the forum, so are we. So I think it's more as an alternative than as a new forum. And I think that the same way that COVID accelerated a lot of trends, I think that the new US administration is going to do the same. But I'm sure we're going to talk about that later on.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you very much, Jean-Philippe. So I think we've touched a little bit on that earlier, but I wanted to ask both of you, just to be very clear, do you think that the BRICS can be seen as a launchpad for China's ambition in the world? You know, usually China is seen as the giant within the BRICS collaboration, with the BRICS routine.
I think I'll let Daniel start.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, a bit about history of BRICS. I mean, I think there's a few key words that's really important. So the history of the background was the GFC was a deciding factor, right? The global financial crisis in 2008. And that was very important because that was important not only for the world, it's important for China because that's where some leaders in China felt like the West is declining and then the East is rising. And that was a pivotal point. In China, you know, people in the room knows Asia, China very well. You know, CCTV, the Chinese state media, every few years they like to do a very big documentary. They did a documentary on the rise of powers after GFC. They learned lessons from France, from UK, from Germany, from Japan, from US, you know, like Portugal, any of these big powers. And 2012, they made one of BRICS. By the way, the BRICS in Chinese means golden brick. Right, golden brick. That's what it stands for. So in 2012, they made a documentary talking about the BRICS countries. In the introduction, they talk about why they want a BRICS. Why the top. It's the first time for Chinese to know a bit about Russia, except the Soviet, a bit about Brazil, a bit about India. In the introduction, it says the world has been dominated by the West over the past few centuries, and then developing countries never had a say. A lot of the people were colonized. And this is the first time after GFC, this group of major emerging countries starting to have a voice. They want to have being represented in IMF or different things. As we know, IMF, World Banks are always, the president is always American, and IMF is always European, and America has veto powers in this. So after GFC, they say, okay, this crisis was not caused by emerging countries, but by countries in mainly the US. These emerging powers or big countries want to have a voice. I think that's the alternative. That's where the story starts. So whether China is using this as a launchpad, depending on how you define it. I mean, definitely, I think China is using it to increase its influence. So how BRICS as a platform, it could be considered as a tool. So what Xi Jinping or Chinese government wanted to achieve is basically a Chinese dream, right? In Chinese dream is restoration of the Chinese civilization, really, back to the central role in history. So to achieve that, you need countries who be aligned with you. In the old time was a tributary system. In the modern days, in Asia, but not modern days, the countries are fair. So they want to use that as an alternative, as a platform for China to have a say. Because China, after GFC, they realized they're not part in G7, partly because or G8 back then, was because China was not democracy, right? I mean, many of the organizations, China tried to increase the roles in IMF, they rejected. So they want to use this as an alternative to get a group of countries who share similar versions, who are not necessarily anti-West, but at least have their independent thinking, or who doesn't have to be a democracy, who share, different views as a platform for China to increase influence. I think that's what China will do. Launchpad, it's true. China has been using that kind of launchpad. You say, New Development Bank or different initiatives. But I wrote an article back in 2014 or 2013, basically argue in China, domestic reforms, when you try to put a reform, when it's difficult to reform it, what the Chinese government often do is, okay, I create a new institution. Rather than reforming the previous one, I create a new institution, allowing the new institution to have a similar mandate. Let the two compete, gradually retire the older system. I think that would be a way to think how China was reforming the world in a way that will create a new system. We're not saying we don't like that, but new system may taking more responsibilities. I think that's what China is doing. It definitely is leveraging its influence via this because they don't have other major platforms to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel.
I think one interesting thing to add here is first, I think it's key for China, the BRICS, to have a critical mass. So they're talking in parallel to make sure they have critical mass to whatever big ambitions they want to have. But two other things that are interesting is it's the first time really that now, in the past 1 or 2 years, that China is running something. Before, they always used to be on the sidelines, taxis, Now they are starting to play the adults game. Thankfully, it's Chatham House, right?
It is Chatham House.
So they're doing the big boys game. It's it's very, very different than being on the sidelines and doing bilaterals, right? So they're running a couple of big things.
Yes.
They have been successful so far. So we had the African meeting in China. What I heard when I was there is that a lot of rival countries, they were very at ease with each other. Everything went smoothly. But, we complain a lot about the US, but the US has learned of 70 years becoming the leader. So they learn with their mistakes, right? They do a lot of mistakes. China, maybe they will make the same mistakes everyone did in Afghanistan. They will Middle East, so it's not going to be a smooth walk. Right. The other thing which I think is interesting is that I think China, as opposed to the US, has a very bad PR, public relations, very bad. So when I go to China, a lot of people tell me that the Chinese are not good at PR because they...
Yeah.
They say China is very bad with PR because they are all introverts. And I say, well, but the Japanese and the Koreans, Hong Kong, Singapore, they're all equally the same culture, and they have better PR. My opinion is that because of the Chinese political system, the people who get to the top, they are not elected politicians, so they don't have to smile and shake hands. They get to the top because they are very sharp politicians, which works very well for China. But when you go to the global stage, that you need maybe people more like Tanzania, someone who smiles a little bit more, Deng Xiaoping back in the day.
We can reach across the line.
Yes, exactly. And they can connect to people, right? So when you go to Brazil, for example, China has a stake in one of the TV stations. You watch the TV, it's so boring. No one, it doesn't catch the hearts and minds of people, right? So I think China will have to develop all of that. And this is something the US is extremely good at. Again, the new administration is accelerating the process there. This is something we have to watch.
Now, thank you both. Now we have a question also for both of you. We've been talking a lot about the expansion and the influence of BRICS, but now what about integration? What can the BRICS include? How do you see it evolve in terms of trade collaboration, trade agreements? How do you see it evolve in terms of monetary union? I know this is a topic that you know and like a lot, Jean-Philippe. And what about military-wise? The world is rearming.
Yeah.
Could we have a BRICS army one day?
Well, hope not. So trade and monetary. Trade, if you look at the numbers, you have basically China with everyone, and everything else is more separated. So there's a lot of scope to grow. Brazil, for example, has 90% of its fertilizers coming from Russia. So you have a lot of key things. Russia also has a lot of interaction with India. So if you look at the numbers, they're not so large, but in specific things, a lot of these countries rely a lot on each other. So this is trades. There's a lot to grow, though. Monetary. This is quite interesting. This is the question that I get asked quite a lot. Is there the BRICS currencies, right? So people ask, what about the BRICS currency? So I say the BRICS currency will never exist, but it already exists. So what's the story here? the BRICS currency as a concept will never exist. But in practice, there is something happening already. So the good example here is Russia and India. Again, India is a key player here in everything we're talking about. So after the war, Russia was selling all this oil to India, and they couldn't transact in US dollars. So what happened initially is that the Russians were paid in rupees, and then the Russians were with a surplus of rupees, and they didn't know what to do. So what do we do with that? Right, and then they say, let's use Chinese yuan. They know, the Indians, they couldn't tolerate that, right? So what's the solution? The UAE dirham. So what do? They go to Dubai and they exchange rupees for dirham. They buy the dollar, the Russians get the dirham and do whatever they want. So in the end of the day, the dirham is
BRICS money.
It's the BRICS money, and Dubai is the capital of the system.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's growing, and I think this is going to be the case. So I joke that Dubai is the new Hong Kong, and the dirham is the Hong Kong dollar of this new time.
It's a interesting, one of the criticism, as Jean already mentioned, is China's too dominating in BRICS, right? So it's 70% of the GDP of all BRIC countries, 60, 70%, maybe PPP is 50%. I was just thinking, as I was talking about military, there's very little cooperation, and why? It never designed for military cooperation, right? So BRICS was a platform for promoting multilateralism, having a voice, alternative to the Western voice. That's the purpose. And, second, it wants to keep loose. They are very selective of topics. It never wants to build a European Union. European Union doesn't have a military either, but it never intend. They only talk about topics that interested for all the members. And then, Russia wants to talk a lot more on the, let's say, war or different things, but it's very different. So military, China used the Shanghai, cooperation. As you guys know, as one of the cooperation to in the region for counterterrorism or whatever. But one thing I think is interesting is if you think about U.S. influence in Asia, it's in military or wise or cooperation. It's always it's called a hub. U.S. was hub. U.S.'s relationship with Asia was always U.S. to Japan, U.S. to Korea, U.S. to India, U.S. to Australia, previously, before Quad, right? So that was a relationship. Similarly, in economic relations in BRICS, China functioned as a hub for manufacturing. For technology. Overnight or 2 days ago, we just saw the DeepSeek, how it has affected the market globally, right? It has a technology, it has a market, it has a manufacturing, it has the sizes, import a lot of the energy from Middle East and commodities from Brazil. I think that's quite interesting. Look at how the U.S. played a role in Asia previously and how China is playing right now. For me, military-wise, it's very difficult to develop. For economic development, how you have a multilateral, so countries from India trade directly with, let's say, like Brazil, I know there's some trade, but from certain African countries, that's where the field to develop. But so far, I think a lot of the economic sizes, a lot of the structure of the economy is less complementary than those countries in G7 or other countries.
Thank you, Daniel. So I think note for Valérie and when I think that we should open soon Asia Society Dubai. So now I think we should address the elephant in the room. When you talk about China, we have a new president in the US who is arriving with new administration. And this administration is made up of isolationists, globalists, hawks. It's really difficult to know exactly what's going to come out as a dominant tone, right? So how do you read the room? What do you see in this new administration, and what impact on China? Maybe we can start with Daniel.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Trump is definitely, in my view, Trump is definitely good for BRICS. And it's because it provides an alternative, because BRICS was trying to portray it's a promoter of multilateralism and then internationalism, right? Even though some countries are not involved. So Trump is seen as an isolationist. So that would be really supportive for push China and push some countries to hedge against the US and also give a moral high ground for some of the BRICS countries, saying that we are actually promoting globalism, promoting the well-being of the humankind or whatever. I think European Union probably will agree. I mean, I think last year European Parliament just they had a study group or whatever trying to say, okay, we need to establish relationship with the BRICS, probably expecting the US is retreating from this, right? So I think Trump's isolationism is definitely good news for BRICS countries. We push them together because they know even your ally to the US, you can be bullied, right? So I think that's quite straightforward in my view. That's my view.
Yeah. So they need to talk to someone else, right? Because they don't have the US anymore. I think also what's interesting is that this time, when Trump won, everyone looked at it as it was like Brexit. They did a big silly mistake and the world came back to normal. Now it's clear and he's stronger, so it's a more permanent thing. So this is one difference compared to the previous election. The second one, which is huge, is that China is prepared now. So it's been 8 years. China has created all this framework. The BRICS is larger. They have this GSI that, frankly, no one understands, but it's still there. So this is a difference. Also, I think a huge difference, the wolf warrior, right? Last time around, the wolf warriors were so strong in the China foreign policy. I think this was the serious mistake. They created so many enemies. So I think these two things, they make a huge difference. And I think that China will just play quiet and wait for people to reach out, because you'll see what's happening, with Colombia last night or this weekend. Out of the blue, 25% tariffs. And as Daniel mentioned, the moral high ground. Who would have thought, right, that BRICS could be the moral high ground for so what's happening with Denmark, with Panama Canal? I mean, so a lot of the criticism that you could have towards the BRICS, it's difficult to make now, right? So I think that honestly, I think what's happening with the US, and I think it's going to go increase. I think it's a gift for China, because they're putting everyone, and the opposite. I mean, I'm not saying Biden. I don't think he was an amazing president, but this particular thing of alliances, he did quite decently. So the whole tech restrictions that they did towards China, which was quite strong, he could only have done it on an alliance way, right? So you have to have the Japanese, the Dutch, all of that. Now,
small government islands, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, who will want to give up a little bit to help a broader group if they know that maybe the next day they will be hit in the face with some tariffs? So I think this is going to change a lot.
Yeah. So you say that China is quiet, but some people, and many around this room, in this room, I think, believe that China is being economically very quiet at the moment. And so, Daniel, I was wondering, if China is not doing as well economically today as it was before, how do you think it will impact its relationship with the other BRICS countries? Can it still be the dominant voice in the BRICS?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very good question. It's like, I think about it all the time. It's the strength of the BRICS was China was very strong. After GFC, China decided to have the largest stimulus, in its own history, and was a really engine for growth post GFC. So it attracted a lot of friends because China was the only one spending, right? It bought a lot of things from Australia, a lot of things from Brazil, a lot of things from everywhere. And so long story short, China's strength was economy, and that's true. I think when the economy slows down a bit, it would be definitely weaken China's position. However, that being said, China is playing a very long-term game, I think. They want to have a voice. They probably would say, okay, it still has a big foreign reserve. They're willing to spend the money. If you look at the trading flows, China export to developed countries or China or to EMs or BRICS countries, that has increased a lot, right? So number one trading partner for China right now is ASEAN. It's no longer the Chinese export to US was like 20+%. Now it's like 13-14%. So you do see a structure of that changing. So it's true Chinese economic size is getting smaller, but this trading relationship with those BRICS countries actually strengthened a lot. Okay, number one. Number two, the investment within these countries also increased a lot. The number one strategy for many of the Chinese firms right now is called go abroad strategies, like go overseas strategy. And a lot of them, they are targeting BRICS countries or emerging countries, mainly because China's investment or technology is less welcomed in many of the European or Western countries, like Huawei, for example. A lot of other cases like this. So I think, long story short, is basically Chinese economy size is not in China's favor, because previously that was a strength, attract so many countries who wanted to join BRICS. That being said, it has a very different strategy now. The relationship between these investment flows or trade flows actually strengthened. So for BRICS countries, if you look at the past 15 years, they actually benefit more, even though Chinese economy slowed down. So that's quite interesting. Number two, I think is interesting to look how you think. I remember when I was in Korea, so Japan's products was too expensive for many EM countries, right? Korea was hoping EM countries, stay that level. Korea was exporting things cheaper than Japanese, but better quality than the Chinese. So somewhere in the middle. And Japan's was only targeting, G7 countries, good quality, expensive. And China was targeting low end, but China has moved up a bit. So it basically, who are able to serve those low end, consumers? In Africa, in Latin America, it's only China, arguably, only able to produce this cheap but still okay quality goods supporting this. Overnight, we saw, over the weekend, we saw that, DeepSeek, right? There's lots of interesting discussion. Me and, Jean and Arnaud, we joked about. It's a Chinese PDD, Pinduoduo. I don't know if you know this. It's basically disruptive innovation. They're able to make it so efficient, make the prices so competitive, and with a low cost. I think that's an innovation that, people overlooked. It's true, China has moved, the economy is slowing down, but its products are becoming much, much more, efficient. If you look at the history, the Japanese goods during the Second World War, in early, around that period of time, no one wanted to buy Japanese goods because it was considered low quality, bad products. But then later on, they move up. So I think the flying geese model does work. So for BRICS countries, it's true Chinese economy is not good for this, but then within itself, it still provide a market for them to integrate a bit further.
Yeah, I think another point which is quite interesting is that China got a bit too comfortable in the past 20 years that it got all the influence that it wanted because of the growth they had. Mm-hmm. So everyone came. All the Europeans, Americans, they came and they went to China. Now we go to China, you don't see foreigners anymore because there's no growth. So they have to learn to influence without money. And influence without money, you have to have a common dream or a common concern, or you have to give something other than money. So giving something other than money could be technology, but they have to think a different game because up until then it was very easy for them because everyone would come. Then you go into a different problem. It's the trade balance, right? China doesn't consume a lot; it produces the best products. And when you talk to a lot of Chinese, they say, "Well, but I produce the best, so you do whatever you want. I'm winning the game." And I'm like, "Look, if you were a small economy, that would be fine. But you're not Taiwan, you're not Korea, you're too big." So it's this still the mercantilist mindset. It's quite troublesome. I joke that to do business in China is mind, right? Mm-hmm. You have to buy and sell. But I say, look, you just sell. You have to buy. If you don't buy,
Trump's argument.
You have to go. The interesting thing here is that again, Trump might accelerate that, because if Trump goes very aggressive against China, China will have to do a little bit more stimulus. It will have to rely a little bit more on itself. So this might accelerate the hope for more consumption domestically. So this is something to watch.
Mm-hmm. We know that China buys from Brazil quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, we are one of the few lucky ones to have a surplus.
And Xi Jinping came to Brazil during G20 last November. So, he was welcomed by President Lula, and he was received with big honors. So how do you see that bilateral relationship evolve? And do you think that the Brazil-China bilateral relationship can be like the most defining one within BRICS,
Yeah, so it was very funny. So first of all, the G20 didn't have a huge breakthrough, but you don't expect that from such a large grouping. One thing, everyone came, which is quite remarkable. You had from Biden to Xi Jinping, which is not always the case, right? Xi Jinping was so happy that I had friends on WeChat saying that they think the big boss is happy, so he's not worried about the economy. So that was funny. So you had Xi Jinping happy. Macron was running, jogging during the day. Yes, they were quite close. So the G20 was nice. This is now one example how China is strong, but people also want to have some space. So Brazil has one of the best relationships with China. Why? We have a surplus. We don't have borders. We don't have historical problems. We're far away from China. We don't compete in products. So it's as good as it gets. But China is getting a bit too big, right? So the Xi Jinping did all he could to get Brazil to sign the Belt and Road. And it was like 50-50. And yet we didn't sign the Belt and Road. So you see that even with Brazil, which is a good partner, we have all the positives, and yet we didn't sign the Belt and Road. Right? Xi Jinping went there. It was the 50-year anniversary of Brazil and China relationships. It was all set. They gave the medal to Dilma Rousseff and yet we didn't sign. So this shows also the limits that China has and the worries that a country like Brazil has. Will Brazil be the most important? I don't think so. I think Brazil is quite
Brazil relationship.
Yeah, I think Brazil is quite interesting because it's the discussion of West and anti-West. A lot of Brazilians, if not most, consider themselves West. We are actually on the Western side of the hemisphere, right? The only significant one in the BRICS. But I don't think we are at our best in terms of global role these days. And I think we're going to be very important in terms of bridge with our history of neutrality. I think the key one here is India. India is the key one here, and I think the fact that they did the Kazan meeting shows that they really want to play the long game. Right, and you saw now at the Trump inauguration, Jai Shankar was in the best seat. He was in the front seat. He was the first one that saw Marco Rubio. They had a call with Trump, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. So I think India is going to be the one to see it, because they have a very, very strong history of non-alignment. And the fact that they are at BRICS and they are still after it, it's a proof that this is much bigger than China, right?
Thank you very much to both of you. I think we still have some time to take some questions. Opening the floor, please, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. I would like to hear from both of you. One thing I remember in 2009, only Brazil, Russia, India, and China, it made multipolar geopolitical sense. Because in fact, it was a country from South America, a country from Eastern Europe, the country from South Asia, and the country from Asia. In fact, they were the real four big powers that made sense for that. And the entrance of South Africa, which was of a completely different size, was only to make it fairer and have a representative from Africa. My question is, of course, things have evolved, particularly after what's happening in the relationship between Russia and China. But I sense that at the time, nobody wanted, of these four big ones, nobody wanted to consider one of them as the leader. China, of course, has in a way imposed South Africa, as they are also being key to have some other members coming along. But my question, in fact, is it's almost like ironical that those who started as fighters for multipolarity, not wanting the hegemony of the United States in geopolitical terms, are they, in the end, having a unipolarity inside BRICS? When I think if you wanted to really stand by the arguments of different poles the functioning of the international system, you should, if I was Chinese, I would be also on not looking as I'm the only kid on the block of BRICS. Particularly when you think of China, or when you think of India, I don't think India would be very happy with having a kind of secondary role. The self-esteem of Brazil, the same. And Russia is in a very difficult situation because of the needs, but Russia has never seen herself as anything but a peer of China. So my question is it still the best way to describe BRICS as a vehicle of China or as an alternative multipolar advancement of the way the international system functions?
Daniel.
Well, I mean, thank you very much for the question. I felt at the beginning when, let's give an example, New Development Bank, right? In terms of economic size, China was much bigger. Back then, China wanted to be the high ground of the global South, basically say, okay, look, IMF, World Bank is dominated by the West, so they have a veto power. There's people all from there. But for New Development Bank, let's rotate. Every president rotates, and even though China, it has the same share except the BRICS, South Africa. And then let's say another example, AIIB, it has the largest share of the bank, but it doesn't have a veto power. So I think, in my opinion, China back then, because it knows it doesn't have the shared vision like the America's leadership or dominance, like people share value. So they played a low key and particularly, giving rooms for smaller countries to do. In my view, China still, consider this a platform that China doesn't dominate. It is more platform for people to say. I doubt they'll have a strong voice or whatever, like I say, clauses after like communique like after G7, a major one. It was more platform, but was designed for selective, so everyone's respected in their sense, and everyone is it's inclusive. Whoever share the vision can join, and whatever topic people are interested in, they discuss. So long story short, I don't think China is dominating this. I mean, it probably doesn't have the power to dominate. As Jean said, India is too big, and Russia probably will disagree. But that's my view.
Yeah, I think the Middle East helps a lot. Saudi, the UAE, the new guys from Southeast Asia, Indonesia. I mean, we have to remember 2021 or 2, I think was 2, when the G20 was in Indonesia. Jokowi went to Ukraine, he went to Russia. He was trying to do something about the. So I think I think in my opinion, but I think the example here is China for the BRICS is like the US for the G7. I think it's the similar. That would be my quick framework. If the US wants people from the G7 not to do something, it will not be done, right? We know that.
Right.
I think BRICS is going to be similar. But if it wants to do something badly and everyone else is against,
Right.
I don't think they will. Yeah, that's my answer.
Interesting. Yes.
But the difference of the BRICS is that there are two rivals, India and China. So how do you play that? How do you see that duo play out in the coming?
But that's the beauty of it, I think.
Of course, but India has a big advantage, the demographic, positive development. But it seems to me India is admiring China's success and being afraid of China. China is not impressed or worried about India very much. So, I don't know how those two will play out in a few years from now. I agree with you. Trump is a president to BRICS. I mean, it's a fantastic advantage for China and the BRICS countries in general.
So I think the India and China, I think they will do one thing at a time, right? India is very, very worried about development. They know they have to grow. When they start to grow and globalization is closing, so it's very bad for them. So everyone in the region made a lot of money, got rich because of globalization, because of open economies. India, this window is gonna close. So I think they want to make sure that China is not a problem. They want to get the border issue done so they can focus elsewhere. I think and I think that the China-India relationship balances the BRICS. It gives us, you see how many times I mentioned India as a point to make sure that the first expansion of BRICS was more problematic, because it had Iran, all these countries that you would think it was like a Russia-China thing. The new one shows that...
Recentered a bit.
Yeah, a lot, I think, yes.
Yeah, I mean, as we talk, India, China just started as a direct flight this week. So, it shows they have a lot of fight, but after all, it's politics, right? I was in India many years ago, then I remember everyone in India knows the China-India war. But no one in China, less than 1% of Chinese know, we actually had a war with India. That shows the perspective. But then economic relationship will start to mean Modi was not as strong as people thought until last election we saw, right? So he needs to balance as well.
Yeah, I agree with the fact that I don't see India or Russia playing a second role in this group. But if I am a new player and I want to avoid the domination of the US, why should I go to the domination of the Chinese?
I think the second point is that they are trying to balance each other, right? So it's all about the balance, right? So there are two ways of the competition between China and the US. You can have the restriction, which I think is going to be the case now with the new administration, that if you do this, I'm going to punish you. Or you can have the incentives, right? So hopefully, having the two windows open with the two sides, these countries, they can play a better role. So I think one very important example here, which is not India, is ASEAN. ASEAN is the key region also to see. It's very comparable to the EU. It's a region that flourishes on trade, very open. So if you have a big fight between US and China, ASEAN is going to be in big trouble.
Neutral.
Also, during the Cold War, it was a region that had all kinds of wars. The Cold War was not cold in the region. It was very hot, actually. So ASEAN, what's ASEAN doing? They have the ASEAN Plus, so people from Europe come. The last thing they want is to choose sides.
Yeah.
So they want to have like Singapore. Singapore always tries to do both sides. So I think this is the magic, I think.
Alors, on a trois questions. La première au fond.
Apart from the fact that obviously they keep America out, what holds the BRICS together? Have they got a vision for what they want to do, where they want to go? How do they decide who would join the BRICS and who would not join the BRICS? What gives them cohesion, and how do they decide what to put on the agenda for a meeting, for example, and what not to? What gives them substance to put to do?
Yeah, I'm going to answer quickly and pass to Daniel. The question is perfect. So I'll give you an example. The G20 is going to be in Brazil this year. What's the agenda? Right? It's very hard to have a very strong agenda. The agenda is going to be most likely food security and energy transition, which is something everyone agrees on. So it's very hard. So I think that on the inclusion that you asked, it was China. Brazil didn't want to have an inclusion. Brazil, India, South, they didn't want. They were very happy to be one of five.
Okay.
And China pushed, and then the second round, I think they okay, since we increased. So again, comparing to G7, US and BRICS, China.
Okay. So I wanted to focus a bit about Turkey, because as far as I understand, Turkey tested the water, and the water from the Lavrov was not very hot, and the Indian assumed the responsibility to say it's not the moment for enlargement of the BRICS, and Turkey understood that it was not really very much welcomed by India, Pakistan. And I don't know if it's true, but my last information is that Turkey has decided not to candidate anymore. Do you confirm that? And if it is the case, it is interesting. As a case, attraction or no more attraction, and to comment on that.
Yeah, maybe Daniel can complement. What I heard is that they were still talking. Like Vietnam is also talking, and they haven't joined because Vietnam is the opposite. They see an opportunity that they will be the U.S. friends in this new friendshoring or whatever. So that example of Turkey shows the limitation also of bilateral issues that countries like India can put, but they're still talking there, right? So I don't think they. From the last thing I saw, I don't think they ruled out completely. They are what they were. I think they were part of the larger group, but they didn't confirm. Like I think Nigeria was the same, Vietnam is the same.
Very US. Vietnam is the US's friend until the US accuses Vietnam of currency manipulation.
Yeah, they all share the same problem.
Maybe Daniel, you wanna complete?
Well, I mean, I agree. It's like a clubs, right? I mean, I live in London. It's what I find interesting. Most of the clubs are exclusive. Recently, I joined a club, like organization, social mobility. It's called 93% Club. I was asking why is it 93% Club? It's because there's 93% of people in the UK attended state schools, because they are so. They don't belong to any. They belong to the majority, but they're not part of this global elites. They decide to form a group. So I attended the events. Well, the agenda wasn't not well balanced because it's too inclusive because people have an agenda. So similarly, if you're a player, or anyone, if you have it doesn't cost much money to be a new member of another club. You find any benefits, you go there, have a check. So I think it doesn't hurt for the members because the bar is very low to join, because you don't have to be a democracy, you don't have to meet an OECD sort of different categories. the contract to join is so easy to be a member. I think that attracts some of the members, because why don't you just attending one? It doesn't cost much. You get a platform, you hear the stories. That's how I look at the BRICS in a way, right? So it's a super open, flexible, and loose.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yes, I would like to come back to Russia. After all, Russia is one of the founders of the BRICS, and what is now its real role in front of China and India. And second question also maybe about the Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Apparently they under the pressure of Russia. I mean, these two countries didn't want to enter the BRICS. What is the role of Russia and the real Russia, and now the role of Russia?
Daniel wants to start.
Oh, you may please. You can start. I mean, yeah.
Because the BRICS with Russia is just the BRICS, you know. So yeah.
No, but I think Russia, as I said, Russia has a very key place for a lot of countries. Brazil, 90% of our fertilizer. So Russia for us is like the Nord Stream for Germany, because we are an agricultural country. So I think Russia plays very well its role with this. They do fertilizer for one, guns for the other, oil for the other. So Russia and India, they have a relationship that goes 50, 60. When the Americans went against India in the 70s, especially in the Bangladesh war, and the Russians, then they did the relationship. The Central European countries, I don't know much about them joining. But I think Russia wants to have its own friends as well, right?
Exactly.
They don't want to be the only one.
And apparently Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan finally didn't decide not to be member.
Yeah, that shows that the Russians and the Chinese, they will not be friends forever, as they said, right?
Sorry, just last one. This is interesting about the global south, right? If you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, most of countries, whether by population, by number of the countries, they like to stay neutral. It doesn't mean they're on the Russia's favor, but most of the global south, they chose a path they think is neutral, right? They think it's a big power struggle. They share very different views with people. Of course, I understand the history in Europe, right? It's very different. I think that's the voice is a good example where they share very different world views.
Thank you.
I just want to focus on the multilateral aspect, because I think 7 years ago, or since 6 or 7 years ago, China and other BRICS countries are talking that BRICS is really the new multilateralism, not a la carte americaine, but the new world. And what we see now is that Trump comes in there with a big wrecking ball. It's true what I read in Axios, that he did all the Colombian staff members from the World Bank and deported them back to Bogota, that he withdrew the visas of the Colombian embassy people in Washington. Well, he may do that tomorrow in New York. And then suddenly you have the UN shrinking and shrinking. And here you now see the United States reaching out immediately to Saudi Arabia, your brother-in-law of BRICS. And I think that Saudi Arabia will play the role of a Trojan horse to prevent BRICS having a big role in world affairs. And that ultimately we come back to whatever the United States wants, the United States gets. We don't know whether the World Trade Organization will survive, or whether with all these tariffs left and right, it will just lose its meaning altogether. So I think I'm not looking at food, or I'm not looking at energy. I would look really also at structures. We don't know what's happening to the G7. What will Trump do this year to the G7? Will he destroy it? What is then the unifying force of the Western countries? We will have a new leader in Canada. We will have a new leader in Germany. We have a total twist towards the right in Europe. How does it play all together? Will they all align with Trump and create a new unifying force, the right wing of the world? And then we come, and I want to stop you, then we come to the BRICS currency. The Americans might say, whoever deals not in the dollar is our enemy, and we will put tariffs on that. So what are you going to do then? I mean, the UAE will be the first one walking away and say, no, we never had any idea, Mr. Durham. You come now and tell us this. It's not true. So we are in a totally uncharted water territory, what is happening. And we may see in 2 or 3 months that the situation looks completely different again. India, the same thing. India dealing with the United States now about also the deportees. What are they doing? How does it play out? So I don't think we are at all in a stable situation with BRICS here on one hand and the G7 and America on the other hand. I don't know. No. But to me, it's very troublesome, quite frankly.
I agree. It's going to change completely because we are going into a multilateral world with weaker rules. It's totally different. Everyone wanted multilateralism with a strong UN, right? That's the theory, right? Yeah. That's not what we are getting, right? We are getting at multilateral with no rules. So I think alliance is going to be broken.
This is like Chinese Republic with warlords, right?
Yes, I guess. I'm afraid. So it's going to be touchy water, and I think a lot of countries are going to be tactical. I think the example that you use about the Saudis, right? This is China will have to deal with the grown-ups. They will have to deal with this funny situation. MBS is dealing with them or not, right? They will have to see it, right?
Paying $1 million a day to Kushner.
We have one more question here.
Just one last example about you talked about the currency. So I heard this on a podcast. I thought it was amazing. That they said the sanctions are like antibiotics. It works a lot in the beginning, but the more you do the sanctions and all of these things, the more you create resistance. So the more you threaten to do this, to do that with the currency, the more people will want to have alternatives.
So resistance to antibiotics is a key topic of G20.
Yes,
yes.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful so far. So I've been lucky enough to spend the last week in Washington, D.C. So that's been an interesting place. And a lot of things that I was hearing from my friends who are now going to the Trump administration was the importance of a new Monroe Doctrine. So we are seeing this already taking place with conversations about Greenland, about Panama. But an essential sort of keynote of this is the notion of economic security as national security. And so in light of that, the relationship that Brazil has with an economic trade surplus with China, that could perhaps maybe be considered a key threat to American interests in the region. So how do you think that's going to be affecting the way that Brazil is going to be traversing a very important geographical relationship with the United States, an essential trade relationship with China, and then perhaps even if it's going to find itself maybe finding rapprochement with the Europeans or looking elsewhere?
I think it depends a lot on who is in charge. So Lula is quite close to China.
Lula is quite close to everyone.
No, not always the right people. So Lula, he does well with GDP. So if it's him in charge, I think he will stall and try to gain time. If you get a new administration, let's say center-right, the fear is that they go too fast on Trump and then they neglect China. And the key here is to do both, right? So I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that. That said, I think Brazil for both countries is the 10th or 20th worry because Brazil doesn't have a geopolitical problem. We don't have borders. It's an easy place. Like if it's not solved immediately, it's fine. I don't know if Daniel has anything to add on the.
No, I mean to me it's all like it's a game theory and with a lot of uncertainties. So what the best interest for any one player in this game is to hedge, because there's a lot of uncertainties. So whatever geography, you just want to hedge. You just want to, no matter it's far away, whatever economic relationship, you're betting someone that you don't know. If you're betting everything on Trump or the US, things may change. The change of government, everything changes. So everyone who playing this game is just a betting hedge. Now, whoever you're weak, people forgot like Iran and Saudi, they had an agreement that was brokered by China, right? So this is things they're hedging all the risks because of the uncertainties.
Yeah, I think the key thing is the reliance, right? So if Trump is good or bad, it's a personal opinion, but he's changing the rules, right? Mm-hmm. So that gives a lot of uncertainty. Right? So,
well, that's a very hedge fund manager conclusion.
No.
Hedging.
I think we're gonna wrap up here. Thank you very much for our two speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Building your online business? Go to Wix.com and set up your store on a single integrated platform.